Hey friends, I'm Greg Nettle and I serve as president of Stadia Church Planting, where our vision is for every child on the planet to have access to a church. We help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation. I'm so delighted you've joined us on this episode of the Church Planting Podcast. Our guest today is a good friend of mine and a colleague, Mr. Jeff Bennett. Jeff is a church planter. He helps church planters all across the country and, quite frankly, around the world, making numerous trips these days into Australia to help with church planting on that continent. Jeff serves at Stadia in all of our partnerships, working with all of our partners across the USA and around the world. But most importantly, Jeff is a continual learner. And so today we're going to be talking with Jeff. We're actually going to be dialoguing together about what we're reading right now, what we're learning from. Welcome to the Church Planting Podcast. Welcome, Jeff Bennett. So welcome to the Church Planting Podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to have my very dear friend and close work colleague with me, Jeff Bennett. Welcome to the Church Planting Podcast.
Thank you, Greg. It's great to be here. I appreciate the invite. It's fun to do this with you.
Jeff, this is going to be a little bit different of an episode. I mean, you and I work together, and one of the things I really appreciate about you, you're always recommending me our whole team. You're recommending new books to read, bringing new insights, and it's books, it's podcasts, it's music, it's all kinds of stuff that you're learning. I love how much you love to learn. And it's one of my passions as well. And it's not one of our core values at Stadia, but it's one of the ways we want to enter the room is with a posture of learning. And I think for you and I both, that's been a long life of reading, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's huge. I think that posture of learning, posture of curiosity, not having all the answers, not being threatened by others who know more. I think it's a huge value of ours personally.
Okay, so I'm always I'm always listening and keeping a list, and I love, how has the smartphone changed your life? Well, it means that when Jeff Bennett recommends, he says, "Hey, I just read this book, man, it's incredible." I can just actually go right to Amazon typically and order it, and it's waiting at my house when I get home or whatever. And I don't. Hey, just out of curiosity, how much do you use Audible, and how much do you actually read digital or hard copies?
Yeah, so I typically read instead of Audible. I'll do podcasts, but I don't listen to many books, maybe one or two a year while I'm driving. Typically I read probably 75% digitally, 25% with a book in hand.
Yeah, I used to read, so I used to be a real adamant, I love to read hard copies. And then with my travel schedule, it just cumbersome to carry multiple books at a time with me. So I moved to digital. And then now I've kind of delineated. So, and you'll kind of hear this as we talk about this today, but if it's a book that I'm just reading for entertainment, a lot of times I'll do it on Audible. But there are certain books like I'm going to talk about today where, man, you've got to have a hard copy in your hand because it's one you really want to refer back to easily or want to give away to other people, or it has exercises in it. And so I think there's kind of a blend as well these days. So.
I tell you, one of the reasons I've tried to do more digital reading is keeping the notes. So I mark my books up, but I use Evernote. So when I am digitally reading it, highlighting, I can download to Evernote, search it immediately. So even though I prefer to have it in my hand, the access of every note that I took in it is so quick.
Okay, no wait. How are you? So you're telling me, because I don't do this, and so I'm discovering here right along with all of our other listeners, you're saying that when you're reading a book, do you use Kindle as your reader?
I use the Kindle.
Okay, and so I'm making all those highlights. How do you get them into Evernote?
So go to a link on your Amazon account.
Yeah.
And it has all the books in my digital, notebook with all the notes. And then I have an Evernote, click on my Google Chrome, and it immediately downloads all those notes.
Oh, you just changed my life, Jeff Bennett. See, folks, this is why I love Jeff Bennett. It's hilarious. I recorded a podcast with Doug Fultz earlier, Jeff, and Doug works with us as well. And Doug was showing me how to do something on generative AI. And I was like, oh man, that's going to be life changing for me. It's one of the joys of being part of a team, right? Is that
Yes,
you can
absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
let's jump in. We're going to talk about some of the books that we're reading that have kind of been high impact books for us. They can be workbooks, they can be personal, they can be fun, whatever. But these might be great books as you head into, your next vacation or some time off, or really some of these you need to pick up kind of urgently because they're that good. Jeff, let's start with you. What's a book that you would recommend?
Yeah, so this was a great exercise, Greg, just going back through what I've read over the past year and thinking, okay, prioritizing. And here's a book that I have found myself recommending to everybody 40 and older, called From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks. And the subtitle is Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Your Life. And so the whole idea is like, what can I do now, today, to make my older years a time of purpose and success? And
Okay, let me just stop you right there because I just bought that book. I'm pulling it off my shelf right now. Now, unlike you, I'm not in the second half of my life yet, but but I did. I literally just bought this because you recommended it, and then I was with Tim Harlow, who leads one of the largest churches in the United States, and he said as well. He said you've got to read this book, Greg. So, what's so urgent? What makes this so readable?
I think for me, Greg, you and I work with pastors, leaders. I mean, that is our job. We're constantly with leaders. And I think watching leaders towards the end of their, let's say, their career, I mean, they're still, coaching, doing great things, but maybe it's their full-time ministry, they're coming towards the end. You and I, over the years, have seen lots of pastors not end well. And I grew up a preacher's kid. And so I've just, in recent years, just going, man, what do I need to be doing to make sure I finish well and finish healthy? And so that was really what was kind of attractive to the book, because he really talks, it's really the whole process. It's a process he went through. It's like, man, how do I still be effective and productive and just be in a good place in later in my life? And he talks about in the book which was helpful, two types of intelligence that people possess. So one of it is fluid intelligence, and this is just really kind of your raw smarts. So ability to reason, think flexibly, solve problems. And he said this is what declines at in your 30s, 40s, 50s, depending on maybe what you're doing, but all of it declines at some point, the fluid intelligence. But then the second type of intelligence is crystallized intelligence, and that's not smarts, that's wisdom. So, it's relying on a stock of knowledge. This is something that increases in your 40s, 50s, and 60s and doesn't diminish till quite late in life, if at all. So like what he says is when you're young, you have raw smarts. When you're old, you have wisdom. So when you're young, you can generate a lot of facts. When you're old, you actually know what to do with those facts.
I thought, sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes. So he says the key is transitioning from fluid to the crystallized intelligence. And so his book is talking about how do you do that? How do you go about that?
Awesome. Okay, since we're in that kind of second half thing, I'm going to stay with that with the first book
Yeah.
I recommend. I just read this on a break this summer. A friend recommended it. It's called The Fourth Quarter of Your Life, Embracing What Matters Most. And so, just for all of you who are out there in 40 and younger, hang with us here because we got lots of other good recommendations.
Right.
But I would recommend this one from anyone who's 40 and older. Absolutely life-changing. This is one you need to buy a hard copy of because it has exercises throughout it, literally in every chapter. And my wife and I went through this together, and we would do the exercise in advance. Then we'd come together and discuss them. And it's same thing. It's all about how do you want to live out that second half of your life? What do you want to be remembered for? Where do you want to be financially? What kind of impact do you want to make? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? And it gives you just really practical steps to take in that, Jeff. So I'm giving about 20 copies of this away for Christmas this year. All my closest friends are getting a copy of The Fourth Quarter of Your Life, unless they're under 40, and then they're getting a different book. So Yeah.
I think what's so great about that, Greg, is I think the encouraging part is there's intentional things you and I can do today
Yeah.
to help us in the future. And I think that's the really
And to
important.
maintain our effectiveness, right?
Yep.
I think that's the really critical part. How do we become the best version of ourselves? Which we all want to do. I think regardless of whether you're 15 years old, 25, or 65, you want to keep learning and growing and becoming the best version of who God created you to be.
Totally. Yep.
All right, give
So
me
good.
another one, Jeff. Give us another one.
All right, I'll go with Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. I believe you might have read that one because I think you're going to
I
be
haven't read it. It's up here. I'm pulling it off my shelf. I have this
okay.
huge file that I need to do over, my
Nice.
next break of books to be read. But yeah, I've got that on my
Good.
shelf as well.
It was a fun read. So Will was former co-owner of 11 Madison Park Restaurant in New York City. 11 years after he went there, they became the best restaurant in the world,
Wow.
number one. And so it's really that journey, but what he is known for is unreasonable hospitality. I think first time I got familiar with him, I feel like it was a documentary or a show I watched a while back, which tipped me off to the book. But it talks about the remarkable power of giving people more than they expect. So radical hospitality. I think it's good for regardless of what field you work in. It's a great read.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some great killer. I know. I was actually. If I remember right, Jeff, there's a show out right now called The Bear. I want to say it's on Amazon or Netflix or something like that. That
Right.
my wife and I watch. That's a rough show. Just I'm not saying everybody should watch it, but it's raw and it's a fabulous watch if you can get through it. But it's about the restaurant industry. And one of the stories they use in one of the episodes comes out of that book. And
Okay.
it will blow your socks off about how they did radical hospitality and going beyond people's expectations.
It
Um,
will.
and so it's not like something where you have to be in sales or something. This is just in the way we treat people every day. It's how we conduct our business, and move forward, right?
Absolutely. One of my favorite quotes in the book, he says, people will forget what you do, and people will forget what you said. They'll never forget how you made them feel.
Oh, oh. Yeah, that's money. That's money. All right. My next one is really a surprise that I'm saying this because when I started this book, I did not, this is not even a book I would have picked up, but some friends recommended it. And it is All My Knotted Up Life by Beth Moore. And it's her, autobiography. And I listened to this on Audible, which she reads it. So it's kind of fun to get to hear her voice and her story in her own voice. Beth Moore has been, her platform has been for really largely women Bible studies. So I was never, I know lots of people who have been highly impacted by Beth Moore Bible studies and all this stuff, but I was never really involved in them. So this really wasn't a book I was going to pick that up. Anyhow, I picked it up, listened to it on Audible and couldn't stop. First of all, I respect Beth Moore immensely. Friends, if you know anything about Moore, you need to listen to this or read this book. My wife isn't around, but I bought this for her for Christmas because it's just one of those things that when you hear the backstory of her life, which she is very transparent and candid about, you will be blown away by the ministry output that she had and the person of character and following Jesus that she is. It will encourage you. It will challenge you. And her journey of, even her platform of women in ministry and how she navigates that in the Southern Baptist Church and where she lands is just gripping.
That's so great. All right. So my wife read it. I was looking on the bookshelf behind me because it's there. It's on. I definitely want to read it, and this affirms that I want to read it after hearing you talk about it. That's so good.
Yeah, so it was fantastic. Okay, let me dive a little bit deeper. This is so. So I'm a big fan of Dallas Willard, but I need to be honest with everybody and just say, Dallas Willard's books, and I think I have all of them up here on my shelves, but They can be dense at times, right? Excuse me. They can be challenging to read. Sometimes I need to ask somebody to explain to me what Dallas just wrote. But they're my friend Mark White, Mark,
Oh,
out in Milwaukee, church planter who's, now a very established, thriving church. When I was going on my sabbatical, he said, look, he said, you need to read this book on your sabbatical. And it's called Life Without Lack, by Dallas Willard. And I'll tell you what, I just gave this to one of our teammates, as you know, Jeff, as well, to Mozart Dixon. And this is one I will read over and over throughout my life. It seems like you've read it.
I have read it, and it's fantastic. Yeah.
And the premise behind it is just simply the easy phrase, "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want." Or to quote Eugene Peterson in the Message, "The Lord is my shepherd; I have everything I need." And what does that phrase really mean to us? What does it mean to us as we walk through life with our family, with our friends? For those of us who work, externally, in our job satisfaction, I have everything I need, everything I want, and finding that depth, that all of that comes from God. So this is a life transforming book, one of those that you can study with a group, or just read on your own.
Greg, I'm glad you shared that because it's a reminder. I probably read less this year than I have the past several years. One of the reasons is I decided we read so many good books that I wanted to spend some time this year going back through some of the books I've read before because I feel like, man, I probably forgotten some things I should have walked away from or put more into practice. And you mentioning that Willard book, I want to go back through that. I need to.
Yeah, this is just one you go back to time and time again. Very readable. Coming back to Dallas Willard. It's one of the reasons I love this one. You can, I didn't need any help with it, and so really fun and good. But let's talk about that amount of books and intake, because Jeff, there was a time in my life I had a couple years where several years in a row, where I read about 80 books a year. I had a stretch of about 15 years where I read 50 books a year. And I have to be honest, these days, and there's some different things to talk about that with you. How many are you reading a year? What are you doing?
Yeah, I would say in the past, I tried to read in that 40 to 50 a year. But I try now 20, 25. And I bet I bet you I was 12 to 15 books this year. I've found, and I don't know if it's just with getting older, but you can read tons and not carry much of it with you. And there's just a part of me that I'm like, we're highly selective in what we read. And so I want to get as much out of it as possible. Spend a little bit more time reflecting on what I'm reading and what maybe needs to change in my own life or what I need to learn more of in my own life.
Yeah. So for part of it for me is, I've kind of divided my continued learning into two buckets, if you will. One is what I would call the learning edge intake. So it might be when I read a book like Unreasonable Hospitality. I do want to stay abreast of what's going on and all of those things. But the other bucket what I call my depth intake. And so those would be books like Life Without Lack. And typically depth books require more time. They require more thought process and internalization and reflection. And so I'm right with you. These days, probably it's going to land somewhere between 12 and 20 books per year. But there are other reasons for that too, just quite candidly. When I was reading 50, 80 books a year, this is a little embarrassing, but podcasts hadn't started yet. And you and I are both avid podcast listeners. YouTube videos and Netflix and all the things that we can access now via streaming and so forth. And so, in fairness, I'm not sure the intake level's a whole lot different.
Right.
It's just different modalities of intake, right?
Yeah. Easier to access a lot of summaries and overreaching themes of books through podcasts and things of that nature. Yeah. Yeah. To your point, here's another book this year that I read that was more of the depth reading, Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools.
Yeah. Talk to me about that. I saw that title, but I haven't picked it up.
Yeah, so book on prayer, and I've just found, man, it's good for me to read a book on prayer every 2 to 3 years just to kinda go back,
Yep.
become a learner again on that end. And he does a lot in the book, addresses roadblocks to prayer, why we don't pray. He does a great job kinda shedding light on the mystery and wonder of prayer, and I love one of the ways he talks about prayer is it being quiet rebellion. Like, it's not just this call to become more disciplined and legalistic, but it's a quiet rebellion to live in a different way in our culture. And so he's great at using ordinary language to inviting God just into what we're doing today. That prayer is it's about presence and being present with God before anything else. So he talks a lot of things about posture, intercession, confession, praying as participation, praying for the lost, lots of different things. And it's an easy read, but it's one of those that you want to go through slowly. He gives some really great practical ways to live out each chapter. And so you just want to go slowly to totally start to take 2 or 3 of those things you're learning through the book to start to apply them in your
Love
life.
it. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me completely shift gears now here on your deep spirituality to my paganness. And so this is I think this is I'm hesitant to say the best book I read in the last year, but it's right up there. Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey. Have you read this, Jeff? Or did you listen?
Greg, I have not read it, and we have friends who have been almost pleading for me to read it. So
Yeah.
I just haven't yet.
Okay, so this is one you definitely want to do on Audible because Matthew
Okay.
reads it, and that makes it really, he's a good reader, really very entertaining. So I'm listening to Greenlight, and it's like, I just want to go out and drive somewhere so I can, I can listen to my book time with Matthew McConaughey. And here's the deal, you're going to have to get through some stuff because he has a lot of crap like we all do in our lives, right? And sometimes I'm going, I can't quite figure out where he's at on his spiritual journey. But he is on a spiritual journey. But man, I'll tell you what, I came away from that book with so much respect for this man. He reinvents himself in, midlife in the midst of wild, unprecedented success, completely reinvents himself, which I loved to hear that story. And then I'm hoping all his stories in life are true. I find them hard to believe, but I'm going to trust they're true. And if they are, this guy has lived one wild life. He needs to go talk to a therapist, in my opinion, about his relationship with his dad. But other than that, this is a great, entertaining listen for while you're out running or driving in your car.
Very good. I got to do it. Too many folks, too many of my friends are recommending it, so got to do it. That's so good. I'll give you one other book. It is by somebody we both know, Jeff Christofferson, wrote Once You See, Seven Temptations of the Western Church. It's written as a novel. Jeff's executive director at Canadian National Baptist Convention and started Church Multiplication Institute. It's a really good read, easy read. Jeff's just a great storyteller. But he kind of focuses on 3 main characters that shine a light on the challenges and the problems within the Western church and really kind of gives us a glimpse of what the church could be and was meant to be. What I will say, like if you're a leader in a church, is it's going to cut close to home. And so you're probably going to be offended at some point in the book,
Wow.
if not multiple times. You're probably going to want to offer a rebuttal. But once those feelings kind of subside, I think you'll appreciate what he's saying and the lessons with it. The reality is he's brushing with some broad strokes in a book like this in regards to the Western church. So what he says is not true of every leader or every church. I think you have to read it with that understanding. But man, it's just some really great learnings in that, and just kind of
Okay, are they things that I as a church leader need to watch out for, or that will
Yes.
encourage me,
Yeah.
or what's the gist?
Both. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think both. I think it's things you need to watch out for, that it's easy to just kind of fall into the mode of the American church and the way we typically do it and have been doing it. Focusing just on a weekend event,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
the work of the church, and that's 7 days a week, focusing on, your gifted pastoral team and not doing the work that every disciple has been called in ministry
Yeah.
and be
Yeah.
equipping them. So, lots of things that, we need to be on the lookout for and need to be focusing on. And I appreciate what he said. He talks about the job of a shepherd in it. And he said, the job of the shepherd is actually not to feed and protect and care for the sheep. Now that helps you do the job. The job of a shepherd's to multiply his flock. Like if you're not multiplying your flock as a shepherd, you're not going to be in the shepherd business for very long.
Yep.
And I think that's just a great reminder, because we tend to have a different picture of the role of a shepherd.
Yes, we do. That right there sold it to me right there, what you said on the end. Okay, I have one more, Jeff, I want to share before we have to wrap up. But you and I have been, as part of the Stadia team, but personally as well, on a journey of kingdom diversity. And how do we become advocates for, participants in, learning from other cultures, ethnicities, races, people that aren't like us. And it's been a wondrous and painful journey, I think, for us all. But one of the important reads for me and I read this early in the journey, was a book called Right Color, Wrong Culture by Brian Loritz. And for those of you who are involved in church leadership, this is such an important book to read, because it talks about the danger of us trying to just be tokenists. Okay, I've got a friend who's a person of color, or I've got one staff person who's on the platform who's a person of color, or if you're a church of color, I've got one white guy or one white lady on the platform. And how do we navigate that? And how do we actually work within one another's cultures to love one another better, understand one another better, and most importantly, exemplify God's kingdom together in an even better way?
That is so good. I have read that one, and yeah, it's so good. I mean, it just helps you understand all of that so much more clearly. And yeah, it's been a fun journey we've been on. Lots of learning.
Yep. Okay, Jeff, one last question for you. Nothing to do with books. What's the best podcast you're starting out listening to? What is it right now? We'll go off the topic of books. One podcast.
Okay. So one podcast literally started listening to in the last week or so, What It's Like to Be, with Dan Heath. So some of your listeners may recognize the name Dan Heath.
Yeah,
He
Chip and Dan.
brother, Chip and Dan wrote Made to Stick, Decisive, lots of other books. So Dan is doing this podcast, What It's Like to Be, and every episode he profiles someone from a different profession and what it's like to walk in their shoes. So highs, lows. Each episode you learn about a different profession, people, their work. So he does things like with some examples early on. He's just got like 6 or 7 episodes right now. A mystery novelist, TV meteorologist, couples therapist, criminal defense attorney. But I mention it for this reason. If your listeners don't care for it, they have to at least listen to the first episode. Dan interviews a stadium beer vendor. And all I will say, totally unexpected, I choked up listening to it. Like, it wrecked me a couple times, and it is well worth the listen.
All right. That's Jeff Bennett. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Church Planting Podcast. Jeff, thanks for being such an amazing guest.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Church Planting Podcast. The Church Planting Podcast is part of the Stadia Podcast Network. To find more great episodes and to see how Stadia can help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation, be sure to check out stadia.org/podcasts.